Father, let us receive it with great thanksgiving. It's in Jesus we come before you. Amen.
Amen. So at youth rallies, they often ask, how many got more than 4 hours of sleep last night? Or how many got more than 6 hours? And I won't ask how many stayed up to ring in the new year, because I can tell. You know, John mentioned a person that he ran into this morning who had a rough night and a rough morning, was feeling headaches or whatever from the activities of the preceding day. And we watched a little bit of football yesterday, and I can only imagine what it's like for those guys when they wake up on New Year's morning after playing 2 hours of football, because, man, that's rough. But happy New Year. Welcome to 2023. And so far I've written the date one time and I did it correctly. So I'm 100% until tomorrow. So, you know, New Year's is a time of looking back on the previous year as well as looking ahead to the upcoming year. And, you know, it's just a great time to go ahead and take the opportunity to think about new beginnings that have taken place or new beginnings that perhaps are in the works right now. I just looked up some statistics of people's lives that were affected, some new beginnings. In 2022, it's estimated there were 2.5 million marriages that took place in the United States. Also, there were 10,687 births per day in 2022. And I had to double check that because I'm like, that seems like way too much. But I checked 2 different sources and even did a little bit of math, and it seems reasonable. So that's a lot of new beginnings for some couples. According to Wyoming's Administration and Information, our population increased by 2,500 in the state of Wyoming. However, we actually had 490 more deaths than births. So think about that. Our 2,500 individuals' growth was due to people moving in, not so much due to new births. But we're going to take a look at 3 individuals who experienced new beginnings in the book of Ruth. And we'll end with some application to our own lives. And we'll look at several different passages in the book of Ruth. So you may want to go ahead and open to chapter 1. Now, I know that Jim preached on Ruth back in September, but he focused on the romance in the book. So, no, just kidding. He didn't. He focused on God's will for our lives and did a great job with that. So I'm not going to focus on that as much as on the new beginnings that took place in the book. So starting with a little bit of background, in verse 1 it says, in the days when judges ruled. Is this going to work? Maybe not. Yeah, so anyway, in the days when judges rule. There we go. Did I do that or did you?
I didn't do it.
Okay. So when are we looking at? When was that? Well, that would have been probably between 380 and 1050 BC. So that's a period of like 330 years. Now, during that time, the book of Judges lists 200 years of peace and 103 years of oppression. So that's not every year that's accounted for in that 330 years, but you can see about twice as many years of peace as they had oppression. Now, during that time, some of the specific judges had conflicts with the Moabites, who were the neighbors over there to the east. They were actually enemies of Israel. And in Judges 3, it recounts how Israel was subjected to the Moabites under Eglon until God raised up another judge, Ehud. Ehud took him out and restored peace to Israel. And the peace lasted for about 80 years. Now, the reason I bring that up is that's the longest period of peace that was mentioned during that time. And so if the book of Ruth takes place sometime during the time when judges ruled, it's possible that it could have been during that 80 years of peace, during Ehud. So the book of Ruth is actually a bright spot amid this tumultuous time that Israel experienced. And so it's really quite a beautiful, beautiful book. It's known for actually being a literary masterpiece. Chapter 1 begins with tragedy and death. Chapter 4 ends with birth and joy. Chapters 2 and 3 begin with Naomi and Ruth kind of making plans. The middle part of those chapters, Ruth and Boaz interacting. And then each of those two chapters ends with Naomi and Ruth rejoicing at the outcome. So there is symmetry all throughout the whole book. It's been said that the book of Ruth is a Hebrew short story told with consummate skill. Among historical narratives in Scripture, it is unexcelled in its compactness, vividness, warmth, beauty, and dramatic effectiveness. An exquisitely wrought jewel of Hebrew narrative art. Now, obviously, I didn't say that. That's way more eloquent than I could say it. So I was quoting. But it really is an absolutely beautiful book. And so if you have not read it from beginning to end, it's very short, which is one of the reasons I enjoy it. And you can read it beginning to end and get the whole feel of what's taking place. But there are three main characters in the book. And each, in their own way, experienced some new beginnings. Now, the first one we'll take a look at is Naomi. And I have a little confession to make. I always had felt like Naomi returned to Bethlehem a little bit like this. Coming back, could be worse. Not sure how, but it could be. A little bit like Eeyore, call me Mara, woe is me. I always kind of felt that way about Naomi because I never really had looked at her situation very closely and thought about it. Wow, this is not the case at all. This woman had experienced tremendous loss. She had lost everything. In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 1, it says, "In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judea, and they went to Moab and lived there." So it begins with famine. And so it begins with the house of bread not having much bread for the people that live there. But instead of toughing it out and staying there, Elimelech brings his family to Moab. And then continuing on in verses 3 through 5, "Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband." So she had lost her husband, lost both of her sons, and had been experiencing a time of famine and was now in a foreign land with foreign culture. Tremendous amount of turmoil in this woman's life. And so that image of Eeyore has now been erased from my mind. She definitely was experiencing a great deal of loss. Now, this, over in verse 13, prompts her to say, "It's more bitter for me than for you because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." And that phrase stood out to me. The Lord's hand is against me. And that's going to come up again in just a little bit. In fact, in chapter 1, verses 20 and 21, listen to how many times this is repeated. "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi?" Which I believe means peace. "The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. 5 times she says that it's the Lord who brought this on me. Now, they did leave the land, the promised land, to go to Moab, and there were several things that took place in their life that probably did not help her situation. But when Jim talked about providence and the role of God's will in our lives, we can see that God did have a plan here because it all worked out beautifully. So God definitely was part of this picture in some way, shape, or form. And Naomi is convinced that it is the Lord that's behind all of this. And Scripture does not say otherwise. So I'm still rather interested in that section. So it took a great deal of humility for her to return to the people she had left a decade before, when she literally had nothing to show for her time away. But this action, this decision to start again, marked a turning point in her life. Perhaps she'd simply reached the end of her rope. She had nothing left, nothing to lose but go back to her homeland. Perhaps she realized that God was closing the door on her time in Moab. Either way, she made a decision to make a new beginning. God used this season of loss in her life to bring about new beginning for her, and in essence, for us all. You can see her perspective shift and her faith grow if you were to read chapters 2 and 3. And then in chapter 4, we'll read starting in verse 14. The women, so this is after Ruth and Boaz have had a child. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better for you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Naomi was given a new beginning. She was given provision of food, land, and offspring through Ruth. Through her decision to return and start again, God provided not only for her, but also for all mankind through Ruth's offspring. So from tragedy came about a new beginning for her, and we see great joy at the end of the book of Ruth for Naomi. Well, that brings us to our next character, and that is Ruth. Ruth was a Moabitess who married into the family of foreigners from a nation who had been an enemy and had a different belief system altogether. In Ruth chapter 1, verses 4 and 5 that we read earlier, we learned that she lost her husband, Mahlon, and her mother-in-law, Naomi, was going to leave the land and return home. This presented Ruth with a major decision. In chapter 1, verse 11, we'll pick the story up. Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this, they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Here we learn that she chose to make a new beginning, a new land, a new culture, and a new faith system. Based on her remarks and actions, it appears she became a proselyte. She committed to the one true God. In fact, Boaz even makes reference to that a little bit later in chapter 2. So a complete turn and commitment on her life to serve the one true God and to stay with Naomi. We get a glimpse of her character in chapter 2, verse 3. She went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. As it turned out. I highlighted that as if that were coincidence. It was not. But we see that she's a hard worker. And then down in verses 10 through 13, she said, "At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, 'Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?' Boaz replied, 'I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband.'" So her character is being talked about in Bethlehem. "How you left your father and mother and your homeland to come live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So she has committed herself to the one true God, and people are aware of that. And word has come to Boaz. So, as a result of this choice to make a new beginning, God, now we know, uses her humility, her loyalty, her hard work ethic to bring blessing on Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, and future generations. If we skip to the end of the book, in chapter 11 of verse 4, verse 11 of chapter 4, it says, "Then the elders and all at the gate said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah.'" So we see a blessing being issued here, and we can see its fulfillment as you look ahead to David and then on to Christ. So truly that blessing was fulfilled. Well, that brings us to our third character, and that's Boaz. Unlike Naomi and Ruth, Boaz's new beginning began at a time when things were really looking up for him. The famine was past, and the grain harvest appears to be plentiful. He was wealthy and respected. He had a good working relationship with his employees. I mean, seriously. How many of you work someplace where when the boss walks in, he says to everyone, "The Lord be with you," and all your coworkers together say, "The Lord bless you"? Wouldn't that be nice? So he had established a very healthy and good working environment filled with faith and good character. The Lord breathed new life into Boaz when he brought Ruth into his life as a servant foreigner by giving him a new purpose, a new calling. From kind, caring bachelor to kinsman redeemer, from prosperous landowner to a picture of Christ. Boaz was already, as I said, in a good place when he was called, but it still took faith on his part to step out and take a risk, one the other kinsman wasn't willing to make. Let's look at Ruth chapter 4, starting in verse 2. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to it except for you, but I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So why was the closest kin not willing to redeem the land? Or why was he willing to redeem the land but not Ruth? Well, perhaps he didn't have money for both land and a wife. Or perhaps his inheritance, he was concerned, would be further divided upon his death. Or the stigma of marrying a Moabite, which he as much as admits, I might endanger my own estate. However, in Boaz's case, God allowed it. So I had to wonder about this. Why is it okay for Boaz to marry a Moabitess? Not an Israelite, at least not a native Israelite. Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's possible she had become a proselyte and clearly was following the one true God and had left her gods in her homeland. Also, marrying a Moabitess wasn't strictly forbidden. And this one, I went back to Deuteronomy chapter 7. And I just want to read this to you, because this is where, before they go into the promised land, it is very specific. God tells them they must drive out the people and not mix with those whom they drive out. And the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, the Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. And the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. 7 nations are specifically mentioned there. There's one that was missing, and that was the Moabites. Now, the Moabites were in that land that they passed through before they crossed over the Jordan and began their conquest. Also, if you look at the specific things mentioned here, these people would pull you away from your God. Well, Ruth had already named the one true God her God. Now, there are still other places that talk about the Moabites. They were forbidden to enter into the assembly. So they are mentioned specifically, but not necessarily in that one instance. So I think the reason that I'm fine with it, because in hindsight, God blessed the union. And so for whatever reason, God was good with this. And I have to think it's because of Ruth's repentant heart, her humble heart, and her following the one true God, and forsaking her Moabite heritage to become one with the Israelites. Now, this new beginning for Boaz brings us a beautiful picture of Christ as our Redeemer, a picture we wouldn't have seen had he not stepped out on faith. He provides for Ruth as the Lord provides for us. Boaz shows compassion and gentleness in chapter 2. Boaz, a man with superior leadership qualities, acknowledges Ruth's work ethic, holds her out in chapter 2. Boaz is courteous towards the young woman and provides for her safety in chapter 2. Boaz generously is shown, or his generosity is shown in Ruth chapter 2 as well. And finally, he redeems Elimelech's land and Naomi's daughter-in-law, as we read in Ruth 4. And so we see a picture of Christ's character, and most importantly, we see the concept and the idea of redemption. So all three of these main characters experience new beginnings. We saw how Naomi returned to her country and people following the loss of her husband and sons for a new beginning. God provided for all of her needs and richly blessed her. Ruth left all she was familiar with after the loss of her husband and made a new beginning with Naomi in a new land, a new people, and a new faith. God provided for all of her needs, blessed her richly, and through her blessed all mankind by continuing the line from Abraham to David to Jesus. And Boaz was called from a comfortable life to step out on faith and extend grace to a foreign servant girl and become a model of the love and grace typified in our Redeemer, Jesus Christ. So that brings us to you and me. This is a time, a season of new beginnings for so many of us. I think about Renee beginning a new chapter in her life with the passing of Ed. I think of the Scott family that tried to reach out for our tryout for our minister position. They're making a new beginning with the loss of Matt. My family recently lost my dad, and I think of my mom in particular making a new beginning. The Parkers have begun a new chapter in the passing of Gary. The Bakewells began a new direction with John working at the hospital, taking a complete change. Many of us have had many major medical procedures done, and several are here today that have experienced a change in lifestyle and been forced to maybe view things from a different perspective. Even though I feel like I was at a good place in my teaching, God gave me a renewed perspective this year, and I feel like it was a new beginning, an opportunity to make a difference. And our congregation has been placed at a point where our status quo was rocked, and we have needed people to step up and fill new roles. So God is ready to do great things in each of our lives. Are our hearts ready for that change? Are we ready to take that step of faith? What will those changes be? What will those new beginnings be for us? Are you ready? It's 2023, and it's time for us to step out and take those steps forward and allow God to work through us and make a new beginning. Thanks. All right, let's